Hello and welcome back. It is the exact same day, and I plan to do another one. We are doing Chapter 4, the Musculoskeletal System, and yay, jazz hands. I know you guys love this stuff, so I decided to do a second round. We've got some, once again, learning objectives. Describe the muscle structure in terms of muscle cells, tendons, and bones. Describe the neuromuscular junction and explain the functions for each part. Describe the structure of a sarcomere. Describe the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. Explain polarization, depolarization, and repolarization in terms of ions and charges. Name the energy sources for muscle contraction. Explain the importance of hemoglobin, myoglobin, oxygen debt, and lactic acid. Describe the difference between antagonistic and synergistic muscles. State the major muscles of the body and their functions. The musculoskeletal system provides form, upright posture, and movement to the human body. This refers to the bones and voluntary muscles of the body, and this also protects the vital organs. Your muscles are composed of fibers that contract, causing movement. There are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. The skeletal muscle attaches to the bones of the skeleton. This forms major muscle masses of the body, also called voluntary muscle. The contraction or relaxation of this muscle causes movement. The coverings of connective tissue, or fascia, surrounds every muscle. This may form cord-like tendons beyond each muscle's end. Aponeurosis is broad sheets of fibers that may attach to bones or the coverings of each muscle. Epimysium is a layer of connective tissue that closely surrounds skeletal muscles. Perimysium is a layer that separates muscle into small compartments. Muscle fasciculus are bundles of skeletal muscles inside these compartments bound together by connective tissue. These layers form a thin layer called endomysium. This allows for independent movement. The structure of skeletal muscle fibers are skeletal muscle fiber is a single cell that contracts and relaxes in a response to stimulation. Each skeletal muscle fiber is cylindrically shaped with rounded ends. Sarcolemma is the cell membrane surrounding each muscle fiber. Within the cell are myofibrils that contain 2 types of filaments: actin and myosin. Alignment of actin and myosin filaments within the muscle tissue causes striated appearances containing alternating colored bands of skeletal muscle fiber. Sarcomeres, repeating patterns of striation units that appear along each muscle fiber. 2 main parts of the striation patterns of skeletal muscle fibers are light bands, I bands, dark bands, A bands, and central region or H zones. Here's a little cool diagram of how this sort of goes. We've got the skeletal muscle right here, bundles of muscle fibers, the muscle fibers in the single cell, the myofibril right here, the I band, A band, and right here we can actually see a thin filament, the actin, and it's sort of all of a breakdown of what's inside. Inside the sarcoplasm of a muscle fiber, a network of channels surrounds each myofibril. This forms the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Transverse tubules or T-tubules, membranous channels extending inwards and passing through the fiber. This is open to the outside of the muscle fiber and containing the extracellular fluid. This lies between the enlarged structures called cisternae and the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and T-tubules activate muscle contraction when stimulated. Neurologic structures. These contain motor neurons. These are specialized nerve cells that deliver an impulse to the muscle cell, causing it to contract. Each skeletal muscle fiber connects to an axon of a motor neuron. Each functional connection is called a synapse. The neuromuscular junction is the junction between a motor neuron and a muscle fiber. The motor end plate is formed by specialized muscle fiber membranes. These have abundant mitochondria and nuclei, which we all know mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Motor neurons branch out and project into muscle fiber membranes recesses. Cytoplasm at the distal ends have many mitochondria at tiny synaptic vesicles containing neurotransmitters. When an impulse is received, the vesicles release neurotransmitters, stimulating the muscle contraction. Motor units are made up of motor neurons and the muscle fibers that it controls. The contraction of skeletal muscles contract with organelles and the molecules that bind myosin to actin, pulling, that cause a pulling action. This requires chemicals and the actin molecules, which are the globe-shaped with a binding site that attaches to myosin cross bridges. Groups of actin molecules twist in a double strands or helixes to form an actin filament. This contains the proteins troponin and tropomyosin. Here's the graph of sort of how it catches, drives, releases, and recovers. It's kind of how it showed with the boat as well in the second graph. Strands of tropomyosin prevent actin-myosin interaction. One subunit of troponin molecule binds to tropomyosin, forming a troponin-tropomyosin complex. Another subunit binds to G-acetin and holds the complex in position. A third subunit has a receptor binding a calcium ion. Contractions can only occur when the position of the troponin-tropomyosin complex changes to expose the active sites of F-acetin. Calcium ions bind to troponin, causes a change in the structure of acetin, and this allows the acetin and myosin to react with each other. The sarcomere is the functional unit of a skeletal muscle. A muscle contracts when the sarcomeres shorten. This sliding filament model is the sarcomere shorten. The thick and thin filaments slide past each other towards the center. The endocyne triphosphate or the ATP phase. The enzyme contained within the globe-shaped portions of the myosin filaments. This causes the breakdown of ATP to ADP and phosphate, releasing energy. Myosin cross bridges to bind to acetin to pull in the thin filament. The cross bridges are released from acetin before the ATP splits, and the cycle repeats as long as there is enough ATP for energy and muscle stimulation occurs. The contraction stimulus are the nerve impulses, and the nerve impulse is transmitted through motor neurons once again and causes contraction of the skeletal muscle. This is also known as an action potentials and transmitted from one cell to another, causing each successive cell to fire. Depolarization is the process in which cells activate in response to the action potential. The polarized occurs when the cell is at rest and ions are actively transported into and out of the cell, and this creates an electrochemical gradient across the cell membrane. This cell is activated by the release of a neurotransmitter. Proteins in the cell wall open rapidly. Ions quickly flow into the cell, equalizing with the charges on either side of the cell wall. When charges are equal, the cell has depolarized. Protein channels close and the process of repolarization begins. For acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter that stimulates skeletal muscle to contract. This is released from the cytoplasm into the synaptic clefts. This diffuses and binds the protein's receptors into the muscle fiber membranes. This increases permeability to sodium. Charged particles stimulate the muscle impulse. Calcium is released into the cytoplasm and binds to troponin, initiates the contraction cycle, and continues as long as acetylcholine is released. Muscle relaxation occurs when calcium is actively transported back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Structure of the acetin molecules returns to its pre-contraction state, completing the relaxation phase. Energy source or muscle contraction requires energy. The main source of the energy for muscle contraction in the body is ATP. ATP is regenerated from the ADP and phosphate. Creatine phosphate enables this regeneration. When ATP breaks down, energy from creatine phosphate is transferred to ADP and molecules to convert them back to ATP. Oxygen use and debt. Oxygen is required for the breakdown of glucose and mitochondria. Red blood cells carry oxygen bound to hemoglobin molecules. Myoglobin is a pigment that is synthesized into the muscles to give skeletal muscles their reddish-brown color. This can combine with and temporarily store oxygen. Anaerobic respiration is required for energy when skeletal muscles are used for more than a minute or two. Glucose is broken down via glycolysis to yield pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is then converted to lactic acid, and lactic acid generally diffuses in the bloodstream and is carried to the liver and is converted back into glucose. Oxygen debt develops when a person is exercising strenuously. Oxygen is used mostly to synthesize ATP, and oxygen debt develops as lactic acid increases. Equivalent to the amount of oxygen that liver cells required to convert the lactic acid into glucose and the amount needed by muscle cells to restore ATP and creatine phosphate levels. It may take several hours for the body to convert lactic acid back into glucose. Muscles may experience a change in their metabolic activity as exercises level change. Aerobic exercises increase the muscle's capacity for aerobic respiration. Muscle fatigue is prolonged exercise that may cause a muscle to become unable to contract. This may occur because of interruption of muscular blood supply or a lack of acetylcholine in the motor neuron axons. Lactic acid accumulation is the usual cause. Lower pH levels, muscle fibers become less able to respond to stimulation, muscle cramps, sustained involuntary contraction, and they appear to be caused by changes in the extracellular fluid surrounding muscle fibers and motor neurons. The production of heat is the most of the energy released in the cellular respirations, which becomes heat. Muscle tissues generates a large amount of heat, and this is because the muscles form much of the total body mass. The muscle response, the myogram, used to observe muscle contractions. The muscle remains unresponsive until enough stimulation, threshold stimulus, is applied. Action potential is generated and results in an impulse spreading throughout the fiber. Calcium is released. This activates the cross-bridge binding and contraction occurs. Twitches are the contractile responses of a fiber to an impulse. This consists of a period of contraction followed by a period of relaxation. A myogram records this pattern of events. The latent period is the brief delay between stimulation and contraction. Two types of twitches are fatigue-resistant slow twitch and the fatigable fast twitch. The process of summation combines of the force of individual twitches. Titanic contractions or tetany are sustained contractions with no relaxation. The actions of skeletal muscles cause unique movements based on the type of joint to which they are attached to and where they attach, and when it appears to be at rest, its fibers are still undergoing some sustained contraction, known as muscle tone or tonus. Origins or insertions, the origin is a relatively immovable part of a movable joint where one end of the skeletal is fastened. The insertion is the area where the other end of the muscle connects with the other side of the joint. When the contraction occurs, the insertion is pulled towards the origin. There may be one or more area of the origin or insertion. So you can actually see in the insertion point right here and the origin point up here on the bicep or the epimysium. Like I said in chapter 3, I believe, of the skeletal system, when we were talking about the joints, how when we were talking about, I believe, sprains and strains, when your muscle snaps, it actually folds up to usually the origin or insertion point, depending on how far away it is. So usually in bodybuilders, once again, when the insertion point snaps, which tends to be the weaker part, when that point snaps, the muscle folds up to the origin point, and you can see that through the thin layer of skin. The head of a muscle is the part of the closest to its origin. Flexion is the decrease of an angle of a joint, and extension is the increase of the angle of a joint. Skeletal muscle interactions are usually a function in groups. Prime mover or agonist is the muscle that contracts to provide most of the desired movement. Synergists, muscles that work with a prime mover to make its action more effective. Antagonists, oh my gosh, this sounds like we're writing a book, are muscles that cause movement in the opposite direction of the prime movers. Smooth muscle, made up of spindle-shaped cells with a single nucleus, smaller than skeletal muscles, and they contain fewer actin and myosin filaments than skeletal muscle cells do. Their filaments are not organized into sarcomeres. Smooth muscle is considered to be non-striated. Types of smooth muscle are visceral smooth muscle, which is the sheets of muscle that form layers of the digestive, reproductive, and urinary tracts. The visceral smooth muscle is the electrochemical signals. They travel quickly to form one cell to another because gap junctions interconnect with the individual cells. The gap junctions are conduction areas between cells. Multiple sheets of smooth muscle tend to function as a single unit because the rapid transmission of the action potential. Multi-unit smooth muscle may be found in sheets in small bundles or as single cells. They have few gap junctions, and each cell contracts as an independent unit when stimulated by nerves. The rate of contraction is somewhat slower than the visceral smooth muscle. Nervous system control of smooth muscle is the autonomic nervous system innervates the smooth muscle. The autonomic nervous system is not under conscious control. Smooth muscle contraction is involuntary. The smooth muscle has very little sarcoplasmic reticulum. Calcium diffuses into the cell from the extracellular fluid, and the calcium binds into an intercellular protein, calmodulin, resulting in a muscle contraction. In general, contraction of smooth muscle occurs at a slower rate than that of skeletal muscle. Hormones in smooth muscle contraction. Various hormones also affect smooth muscle contraction. An example of this would be oxytocin stimulating the contractions of uterine smooth muscles. Cardiac muscles, which is the heart, striated, meaning only one nucleus, containing intercalated discs, branching fibers between cells and protein-lined ion channels allow action potentials to pass from cell to cell. For an action potential to occur, a polarized cell is needed. Polarized cell is a cell at rest waiting to react to a stimulus. The depolarization of a cell requires a trigger or minimum energy level. This results in the opening of channels allowing for sodium to rush in. An action potential fires, stimulating surrounding cells. Repolarization is the recovery phase. Sodium leaves the cell, so it returns to a polarized state. Intrinsic atomicity is the unique ability of cardiac muscle to generate its own electrical activity. Muscular anatomy, there are muscles named according to location, size, shape, orientation, or fascicles, origin and insertion, number of heads, and their function. Here we have a few diagrams of muscular anatomy. Might want to take a screenshot. Muscle movements, the head. These muscles are located in the anterior, posterior, and lateral aspects of the skull. We've got the sternocleidomastoid, the clavicle, mandible, the sternum, rectus captus anterior, and the longus captius, the longus colli, and the rectus captus laterus. I said that already. There's just another place for it. Those are all of the muscles that we see here in this diagram. Innervation provided by the C1, C2, and spinal accessory nerve, longus captus and rectus captus muscles rotate and flex the head. Sternocleidomastoid muscles, which is that long, huge muscle right here in the neck, located laterally to rotate and extend the head. Rectus captus lateralis is muscle that abducts the head. Muscle movements, or the face. The muscle movement of the face, superficial and attached to the skin, originate on various facial bones, innervated by the facial nerve. You want to take a screenshot of that, you can do so right now. The levator palpebrae superius, innervated by the oculomotor nerve. We've got 6 muscles attached to the eyeball, innervated by the oculomotor nerve. Muscles for chewing, temporalis, masseter, lateral pterygoid muscles, medial pterygoid muscles, innervated by the trigeminal nerve. The tongue also contains several muscles that are important in both chewing and speech. Fun fact, the tongue would be this, in proportion, is the strongest muscle in your body. Swallowing, muscles of the palate, pharynx, and larynx, innervated by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Shoulder and back, posterior thorax muscles from the first layer of the back muscles. They include the trapezius, deltoid, rhomboid, and the latissimus dorsi muscles. Deep muscles originate and insert from vertebrae to vertebra. Vertebra to vertebra. Deep muscles of the back include intersponous muscles, that word muscles, multifidus muscles, rotators, semispinous muscles. Superficial muscles run from the vertebrae to the ribs. Erector spinae form the largest group of superficial back muscles. This is subdivided into 3 groups: iliocostus muscles, longissimus muscles, spinous muscles. The diaphragm is a flattened dome-shaped muscle located at the base of the thoracic cavity. Its contraction produces the major movement during breathing. The phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. Scalene muscles. We all know scalene from geometry. The muscles of respiration that elevate the first 2 ribs during inspiration. Other muscles of respiration. Internal intercostal muscles and external intercostal and internal. Your intercostal space are right in between the ribs. Quite usually when people do a lot of running, they come with a lot of chest pain. And I had this one kid who thought he was having a heart attack, and I rubbed his intercostal space. And turns out he was just tearing all of those muscles because he had never run that hard in his entire life. So yes, you can tear those muscles too by running. So muscle movements at thorax. You've got all those muscles there. You might as well take a screenshot right now. Abdomen consists of both superficial and deep layers of muscles that flex and rotate the spine. Linea alba, the tendinous areas that lies in the midline, originate along the pelvic bones and the ribs, insert in the same areas depending on which the muscle is involved. Spinal nerves provide intervention to abdominal muscles. Upper extremity, 6 muscle groups hold the scapula firmly against the body when the muscles of the arm contract, originate at the upper vertebrae and the ribs, insert into various portions of the scapula. Most are innervated by spinal nerves. The trapezius muscle, innervated by the spinal accessory nerve. Pectoralis major and latissimus dorsi attached to the arm and the thorax. Rotator cuff provides rotation for the arm. Major flexors, the deltoid, the biceps brachii, and the extension, the triceps brachii and the deltoid. A lot of injuries involved in sports medicine, especially. You will get to know deltoids. You will see a lot of torn deltoids, a lot of torn biceps with that. And rotator cuff problems galore with sports medicine. Abduction, adduction, and medial and lateral rotation, triceps brachii, deltoid, other accessory muscles. Intrinsic muscles of the forearm. Anconeus stabilizes the elbow in extension, and brachialis flexes the forearm at the elbow. Pronator quadratus and pronator teres pronate the forearm, and supinator supinates the forearm. Here, you might want to take a screenshot of this because I'll be leaving this slide anyways. But it shows the extender muscles, the lateral right here, the extensor tendons, biceps tendons, flexor muscles, medial, and the position. You've got your ulna and your radial. Primarily mediated by muscles in the forearm, divided into extensor muscles, flexor muscles. Extensor muscles are groups of muscles that cause extension. They originate on the lateral aspect of the elbow. Flexor muscles are groups of muscles that cause flexion. They originate on the medial site of the elbow. Instrict muscles of the hand also affect hand and finger movements. Lumbricale muscles interosseous muscles of the thenar emineses, and muscles of the hypothenar emineses. Median, ulnar, and radial nerves innervate all muscles that cause motion of the hand and fingers. The floor of the pelvis is formed by the costigenius, the levator ani, and the perineum is the area below the pelvic floor muscles. Here you can see here, I want to take a picture of it. Structures of the urogenital system lie anteriorly. Structures of the anus lie posteriorly. Bulbospongiosis muscle in the male, the muscle constricts to the urethra and aids in the erection of the penis. In the female, this muscle causes erection of the clitoris. And by the way, the head of the penis and the shaft of the penis are made with around the same cell material and type as the clitoris is. Sphincter ani externus, you might want to write that down because you can say that instead of ass. This muscle keeps the anal canal closed. Urethral sphincter muscle, it constricts the urethra. Muscles of the hip, this causes movement of the thigh at the hip joint. Various lumbar and sacral spinal nerves innervate this area. Flexion of the hip occurs when that word muscle contracts. The gluteal muscles and tensor fasciae latae extend and rotate the hip. Deeper muscles also cause flexion and rotation at the hip. Gemellus, obturator, piriformis, and quadratus femoris. Why are these Latin words? Muscles in the medial compartment abduct, flex, and rotate the thigh. Abductor brevis, abductor longus, and abductor magnus, gracilis, pectinus muscles. Muscle movements, knee joints, affected by the sets of muscles located in two compartments of the thigh. Anterior compartment, quadriceps femoris and sartorius. Posterior compartment, biceps femoris and semimembranosus and semitendinosus. Ankle and foot muscles acting in the ankle and foot are located in the leg. These muscles typically originate in the tibia and fibula and insert into the foot. They are innervated by the tibial and peroneal nerves, which are terminal divisions of the skeletal nerve. This leg contains four compartments of the muscles that act on the ankle and foot: the anterior, superficial, posterior, deep posterior, and lateral compartment. Anterior includes muscles that extend the ankle and toes. Superficial posterior is the gastrocnemius, plantaris, and soleus. Deep posterior includes the muscles that flex the toes and invert the toes. Lateral compartment includes the muscles that primarily evert the foot, the Achilles tendon, and the muscle movements in the foot. The instrict foot muscles, located within the foot itself, arranged similarly to the instrict muscles of the hand. These flex, extend, and abduct the toes. So once again, I will be posting and marking the timestamps so you guys can do a summary if you'd like. No rush. So yeah, that would be it for today. I don't think I'll be doing another video because that means I would have to do more editing. So hope you guys stay well in this time of the pandemic, and see you guys next time.